For Week 9 of the NFL season, the Ravens are back in Baltimore to take on the visiting Denver Broncos. Despite what Vegas and the other betting sites might tell you, the Broncos, and especially their defense, are going to be a challenge for the Ravens, even more so if Baltimore has another error-laden game like they did against Cleveland. But that was last week, and this week, the Ravens have to prepare for Bo Nix and this Denver offense, who are on a 2-game win streak, taking down the Saints and the Panthers. The Ravens, of course, had their 5-game win streak snapped, but are not often a team that loses back-to-back games. As both teams hit the middle of the season with a record of 5-3, a win against a conference opponent would go a long way. As both the Ravens and the Broncos sit in second place within their own division, a win this week also gets them closer to a division title while keeping ahead of third and fourth place. We have a lot to get into for this Week 9 preview, so let's get to it. Welcome in, everyone. This is Jordan with Ravens Flash Report. Go ahead and give the video a like if you enjoy this Ravens and Broncos preview. Subscribe if you're new, and comment down below your thoughts on the matchup, as well as your final score predictions for the game. As I said in the beginning, both of these teams have a record in 5-3, but how they got there is completely different. The Ravens have one of the best offenses in the league, but due to their defensive struggles against opponent pass games, they have mostly relied on outscoring their opponents. Meanwhile, the Broncos boast one of the best defenses in the league, having kept 6 of their 8 opponents under 20 points, and keeping 2 under 10 points. While the Broncos' offense gets its legs under itself with rookie quarterback Bo Nix, they find themselves on the back half of most offensive rankings. 20th in points scored, 25th in total yards, 28th in first downs, 27th in passing yards, and 24th in passing touchdowns, as well as 24th again in net yards per attempt. With 5 interceptions and 7 fumbles lost, totaling 12 turnovers, it's a good thing that the Broncos' run game is at least around the middle of the pack while the passing game develops. The Broncos are 15th in attempts, 14th in yards, 15th again in touchdowns, and 13th in yards per attempt. However, when it comes to the Broncos' defense, there's only 2 statistical metrics where they don't rank in the top 10 in the league, and those are both passing and rushing attempts against them. It actually makes where they rank in everything else more impressive. For example, teams have run 510 plays against them, and yet their defense ranks third in both points allowed as well as total yards allowed. They force the same amount of turnovers as they've given up, and out of those 510 total plays, only 141 have resulted in a first down. The attempts versus yardage is more impressive when looking at the pass game, as teams have attempted the 22nd most passing attempts against them, and yet they boast only the 4th most passing yards allowed, resulting in them being first in yards per attempt with only 4.7 yards per play. They've also allowed 8 passing touchdowns while recording 7 interceptions. Their run defense is also top 5, as they've allowed 851 yards, which is the 7th fewest, as well as only 4 rushing touchdowns, which is 3rd fewest, and 4 yards per carry, which is 5th overall. In the Broncos' 3 losses this year, there are a couple of trends that are consistent. The first is that in all 3 losses, they had below their per-game average in rushing yards, including the only 2 games where they were under 100 yards. The other trend is that in all 3 losses, they were on the wrong side of the turnover battle. In most of their 5 wins, their offense was operating much better, producing 4 of their highest-scoring games. The obvious anomaly here is the game that they won against the New York Jets with a final score of 10-9. But as I stated when mentioning their losses, in each of these games, they either won the turnover battle or it was a draw. When it comes to the Ravens offense versus the Ravens defense, it's unfortunate that the Ravens have been so bad against the pass this year because in almost every other metric, they are a phenomenal team. They're second in the league in points scored and number 1 in total yards. They are the mirror image of the Broncos' pass defense in that they are 24th in pass attempts, yet 5th in passing yards, 4th in passing touchdowns, and 4th again in interceptions with only 2. That also makes for an excellent average of yards per attempt at 8.1, which is 1st in the league. Their run game is also the best in the league, as we are aware of, rushing for 1,600 yards, 11 touchdowns, and averaging 6.2 yards per attempt. On the defensive side of things, they are the best run defense in the league, holding teams to 559 yards on the ground, 6 touchdowns, and a mere 3.3 yards per carry. But of course, as we all know, where they falter is in the pass defense, where they are a bottom 5 team in nearly every measurable way. The worst part, of course, is that teams know it, and they take full advantage of it, with only 1 team having more pass attempts against them than the Ravens, and only 2 teams allowing more passing touchdowns. The Ravens' defense has been a bend but don't break team many times, allowing teams to move decently well between the 20s, but forcing field goals a lot of the time. That unfortunately has not been the case this year with this Baltimore defense. In the Ravens' 3 losses this year, they have allowed an average of 278 passing yards against them, while only allowing an average of 59 yards on the ground. This means that their opponents who have beaten the Ravens have averaged 82.5% of their total yardage through the air and a mere 17.5% on the ground. Just like with the Broncos, there are some trends that stand out. The first and most obvious is that these 3 games, the Ravens offense has scored their 3 lowest amount of points on the season, 20, 23, and 24 respectively. The other trend that stands out is that in 2 of their 3 losses, they had their lowest rushing yard total. The first against the Raiders in Week 2, where they rushed for 151, and last week against the Browns, where they had their season low of 124. In their 5 wins, the Ravens are averaging 479 yards of total offense per game. 251 of those yards come from the passing game, while the remaining 228 come from the Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson ground game. What I'm getting at here is, again, something that is going to be very obvious to Ravens fans and will make sense to most fans of other teams, but people need to understand exactly how important and necessary the Ravens' ability to run the ball is and how much it benefits the rest of their game. The Broncos' rookie quarterback Bo Nix started off his rookie season pretty rough, as one might expect from a rookie in the National Football League. Too many times it feels like the expectations placed on rookie quarterbacks is entirely too high and entirely unfair. Yes, we have seen phenomenal rookies in recent history like Jaden Daniels this year and CJ Stroud last year. However, if you look at Bo Nix and his progression through this season, you can see considerable development. 4 of his 5 interceptions came in just his first 2 games, and all of his passing touchdowns have come in the last 5 games. He may not be Jaden Daniels right now, but I know that if you're a Ravens fan, your concern is that you don't have to be Jaden Daniels to beat this passing defense. The Broncos' run game is a bit interesting, as they are run by committee, with Javonte Williams at the head, but contributions made by both Bo Nix and Jaleel McLaughlin. But once again, if you're a Ravens fan, the run game itself doesn't necessarily concern you. What should concern you is that both Williams and McLaughlin are effective in the receiving game, which is another area that this Ravens defense seems to have trouble figuring out or stopping, especially the screen game. Speaking of the receiving game, we have another group that is basically a committee with Courtland Sutton at the head. With Josh Reynolds on IR, this group of 9 pass catchers are the leaders in targets for this Broncos team, and as you can see, there doesn't seem to be any discrimination when it comes to who gets a ball thrown their way based on their position group. Other than Sutton, the Ravens will need to be on the lookout for the 2 productive rookies, Troy Franklin and Devon Vele, in this receiving group. On the Ravens' offensive side of the ball, we of course know what Lamar Jackson has been doing, which is once again playing at an MVP level as he continues to push even his own ridiculous standards even higher. Despite the loss to the Browns, Lamar's last 6 games has him completing nearly 69% of his passes for 1,579 yards, 15 touchdowns with a single interception, and an average passer rating of 128.9. He's also averaging 10 rushing attempts per game for 55.7 yards per game. Through all 8 games this season, Lamar is on pace for over 4,400 yards, 36 touchdowns, and only 4 interceptions, while also finishing with over 1,000 rushing yards. To say that Lamar Jackson is one of a kind would be just about the only proper way of describing him. Another decent player that the Ravens have on their roster this year is the 6'3", 250-pound running back Derrick Henry, who also happens to be having a fairly decent year. Despite being underutilized in last week's game, carrying the ball a meager 11 times, he still leads the league in rushing yards with 946, which also happens to be more rushing yards than most teams. The Ravens' offense, as many teams would be, rely heavily on Derrick Henry's usage and success, as he has scored at least 1 touchdown in every game, with a total of 11 through the season, either on the ground or through the air. If the Ravens want to win this game, they will have to keep Derrick Henry involved. That shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone who's watching the Ravens this season, and so far through these 8 games, Henry is averaging just over 118 yards per game, and I'd like to see that number go up against this Broncos defense. In the receiving game, the Ravens have found a great duo in Flowers and Bateman, which are of course supported by another great duo of Andrews and Likely at the tight end position. Justice Hill out of the backfield has also provided some of the best pass blocking a quarterback could ask for while being a viable receiving threat. And while we don't know yet if he'll be active on Sunday, the Ravens did just trade for Deontay Johnson from the Carolina Panthers, who was their leading receiver and so far this season has 30 receptions for 357 yards and 3 touchdowns through just 7 games. The Broncos defense is not only effective at keeping teams from scoring, they're also excellent at producing explosive plays on defense, resulting in either turnovers or sacks. 11 players on the Broncos defense have at least 1 sack, with Nick Bonito leading the way, recording a sack in each of his last 6 games. The Ravens' receiving game will also, of course, have to contend with Patrick Surtain, the Broncos' leading corner, who already has 3 interceptions on the season, including a 100-yard pick 6. With 30 sacks in total, the Ravens' offensive line is going to have to be much better at protecting Lamar than they were last week against the Browns. And Lamar is going to have to be sharp and decisive in his pass game with this Denver Broncos secondary in coverage. Looking at it from the other side, the Broncos offense is going to have to hope that this Ravens defense continues to struggle against the pass, as well as struggle to bring pressure on Bo Nix. While they have averaged over 100 yards on the ground over the season, they are coming up against the best run defense in the league, and they'll have to game plan for the ground game not being nearly as effective as it normally would be. If the Ravens defense can do what they have done all season against the Broncos ground game while mixing up their pass rush to be a bit more unpredictable and pressure the rookie into some bad decisions, this game may very well be another win for Baltimore. But that also relies heavily on the Ravens secondary performing better than it has most of the season. If Marlon Humphrey and Nate Wiggins are available, I'd feel a lot better about that happening. And moving to the Ravens offense, if Lamar Jackson continues to play at the current level he has been all season, this team always has a chance to win. But it's important that the coaches remember why they signed Derrick Henry this past offseason, and if they want this offensive machine to continue to be the juggernaut that it has been most of the year, they need to feed number 22. Trying to come up with a final score prediction for this game is a bit difficult. The Broncos defense has been excellent, but so has the Ravens offense. Likewise, the Broncos offense has been spotty, and other than the run defense, the Ravens pass defense has been as well, especially late in games. With all that in mind, I don't see this game being very high scoring or very far apart, with the Ravens winning 27-24. I want to thank you all for checking out this Week 9 Ravens and Broncos preview. Please remember to like the video if you enjoyed it, and share it with any other Ravens fans that you think might enjoy it as well. As always, guys, stay safe out there, and go Ravens.